Yeah, it is. And I mean, there's a lot of questions. And Kelly, I'll throw it over to you because during that Q&A, there was one of the critics that were still there that wanted to know how many breast to dick ratios there were when it came to it. It was like, and I understand what she's saying and I get why, but there's a lot of questions with this film. And again, not only does it build a conversation, but it also challenges the audience to not only, stay with the story and stay with these characters and go for the ride, but also the aspect of challenging who you are and what you believe in. I mean, the story really has a lot of universal connections, Kelly, and I think that's one of the things that really endears it to the aspect of the film festival circuit, because all these different festivals from Sundance, the Buff, to Cinepocalypse, to the Ukraine, and more coming up. I mean, it's so mmany different audiences seeing it and taking it in.
Definitely. I believe the boob to dick ratio is 6-1, but I can double check that.
Oh, good. Okay. With the mathematics portion of this conversation, folks. There you go.
Yeah, I got that question at multiple Sundance screenings, and I'm like, well, there is like a 20-second shot of a dick in it. There's a couple different reasons for that. One, the lead actors have a contractual reasons for not.
Oh, yes.
Frontal nudity. That's a huge reason. But beyond that, like people, it's tough for people to realize the movie, or some people to accept the movie is purely from a male point of view.
Right.
These are characters who their lives went in these dark directions. You could argue largely because of their lack of any sort of like healthy female relationships. Steve Driver with his mom. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on. Same with Tom. And that's, they didn't have friends like that. They were in this toxic environment. And so, yeah, like dick shots, I guess it's just a preference. I think people want parody today, right?
Right.
I think that's what it's all about. You see Euphoria, got a bunch of press. They got 30 dicks in a
Lord.
scene. Yeah. And it's like, to me, that's like, it's like people think there's more nudity, female nudity in the film, and this is not an erotic, sexy film.
No, it's a stigma also with porn that there's certain things in there that's not. And Lucas, you brought up something very interesting about not having normal relationships, and one of those things. Can you talk to the dialogue of the film, and really kind of, I mean, did that also come with the research to learn the terminology and to learn the appropriate way on set and how to speak authentic? Talk to that.
Okay, so when I met a bunch of. Obviously, I have video of Steve and Tom, so I've seen what they say. But a lot of the dialogue is just getting to know people like them and what their views are, to the point where what I do is much writing. I can talk in their voices and approximate how they would think about things. And so all these crazy things they say, it's dead serious, because I've heard people many times say crazier things, and when it's completely deadpan way, it's because it's what they believe. It's like you get a bunch, think about this. You get a bunch of guys with various issues and put them in an insular community.
Right.
And they don't have outside perspectives saying this is wrong, women aren't like that. And they develop a lot of these bad ideas to the point that it creates these delusions, like Steve Driver going to bars and taking his book of explicit pictures and showing women, which he did.
Right.
He was completely surprised when they had a hostile reaction, because he was losing his connection to the real world.
Yeah.
And that explains why he would send his dad these kind of pictures and be like, Dad, I'm getting a blowjob. Like, he would say stuff like that. And I think he just kind of lost touch with what most people consider normal behavior.
Wow.
Over time.
You talk about normal behavior, and this goes for anyone who would like to answer this. Isolation is such a huge theme in this film. Isolation from the aspect of Steven's perspective with the family, isolation with the porn community, isolation later on with a lot of the characters as they go through this trauma. Talk to the aspect of isolation, whoever would like to.
What I can say about it is that basically, when you read Steve's suicide letter, this is a guy who felt like throughout his life nobody understood him. And he felt that once he found porn, he found a group of people like him with like-minded views. And once he found out that he couldn't live in that world, that's why it was so bad for him, because he didn't have a place outside of it. He had exhausted all of the other options. But I'm sure you other guys will have other insights about it. No, I was saying that's definitely one of the main things about it. It's like when you're isolated from reality, after a certain period of time, the bad stuff starts to happen.
And I think just to kind of add on to what Lucas was talking about there, I didn't see a lot of the porn world, but we did use actual girls who work or women who work in the industry. And just in talking to them, it's kind of an isolated world. So when you think of a normal workplace, you deal with whoever, and you might stay in your department, like if you're an accountant or whatever you do. In the porn world, they're kind of isolated just to themselves. And it almost seemed to me that they're not going to shun strangers or anything like that. But if you're not part of the club, you really don't belong.
Right.
And that might just have been how I perceived it. But in my point of view, there's an isolation in the adult industry where it may seem like a lot of people, but it really isn't, and they all just kind of stick with themselves.
I think a lot of it is not just merely isolation, but the idea of perception versus reality being the isolating factor.
Okay.
And I think that's what connects it to a broader statement about the society in which we live. And, the idea that porn is an insular community, but a lot of it is because you have the performers on one side of the equation and you have the consumers on the other side of the equation. And the consumers have a completely different idea of what the porn industry actually is, the same way they have a completely different idea of what Hollywood is.
Right.
If you're not in it, you don't understand. You don't really know the ins and outs. You don't really know struggles that you have to deal with. And whereas, this is actually, I sent Luke an article that popped up in my feed the other day that there's a porn star named Mia Khalifa who says she quit the porn industry like 5 years ago, but she's still one of the top ranked girls in the industry. But she only made like $12,000 off of all of her scenes. And everyone thinks that she's loaded. She's like a millionaire or whatever. And sort of like the same kind of perception that people had about, someone that I went to high school with, after I made Sushi Girl, and oh, you must be loaded now. You made a movie. Like, no, that's not how it works.
No.
Like it's not like there's a real big gulf between people's perceptions and what the reality of the situation is.
I think to that point, a lot of think about if you're already like an isolated type person, then you get into porn, which you have all these people judging you now. It makes it more and more like you get farther and farther away. Like I think it's very interesting how Mia Khalifa, pretty much a large percentage of people consume pornography that they treat performers with a lot of disdain. And which is really bad. It's just this weird thing about our society, back to our Puritan roots.
Yeah, they'll consume it, but then they'll talk shit about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Hypocrisy.
Everybody loves porn, yet everybody, they look down on these people, and they don't care about their lives. They don't care. And Steve Driver, he was up on that hill for 10 hours.
Right.
The cops did not care about him. They could have saved him. That's why I don't. He had a suicide letter, but it was not a suicide. They could have saved him, but they didn't care.
Now, whether it's the aspect of what we see on the screen with the film or the news footage, you see him go down that hill, and with the taser and such, it's very frightening to see how little caring there was for that. And for someone who works in the field, that probably would have come across the Steve Driver in my real life. There's certain things that you look at before you even approach someone like that. Someone who's swinging a sword, someone who's defensive like that, someone obviously who is not living in the world of reality for the most part. Now, Kern, you'd brought up the world of the perception of reality. Lucas, let me ask you, when you're looking at this, the sets we had talked about, you shot on authentic sets, but the way the film looks, because this is a modern true story, a tragic true story. It's not something from the 1970s. There isn't a certain aesthetic that you got for it. So how do you put the fingerprint on it from a visual perspective with lighting and color and production design to go ahead and give it a feel that it feels like a modern day porn film?
So in terms of the production design, it's pretty closely based upon what it looks like in 2010. From a shooting style, I adopted a very docudrama style.
Right.
And I think I used a tripod once, no Steadicam, no dolly. And a lot of our look, we kind of had like an environmental lighting look. And that was, it was basically, I could shoot in almost any direction at any time. And we used old Cook lenses, and then color grading, we added a lot of grain. Like if you actually see the normal untouched footage, it's a lot cleaner. But we add grain just to kind of make it feel like a big inspiration was The Wrestler.
Yes.
That felt captured like a super realistic feel, right? And that was our main inspiration. Like just visually how the camera, you're like in the middle of a spot, like you're there. And that right there is what got us the look, because we weren't doing anything too extreme, save for the grain. But the grain to me added a lot to the visuals, because it just made, I think it was a choice that we were like, look, this is, the grain helps the feeling of it. This kind of dark, dirty feeling that certain scenes have. That's kind of what you feel like when you go there. That's one of the weirdest things about, like, when you visit a lot of these sets, there's a feeling you get. And I might describe it as dread if you're not, like, the first time you go there. And it wears off because but we were trying to capture that feeling.
Wow. Let's round it up with this, folks. And again, all three of you, thank you so much for jumping on Talking Mope. We're scratching the surface on Mope, which is played everywhere from Sundance to the Ukraine. And, hopefully it'll be playing somewhere in the tri-state area very soon. But we'll leave it at that, folks, for right now, which will be very interesting, especially, Boston is one thing, Harvard is one thing, but to play more on the lower aspect of the East Coast, in cities like New York City, where you have 42nd Street, you have that culture, will be a very interesting audience to bring in. But Kern, let me throw it over to you. The aspect of the audio design for this film, being the editor, the post-production for it. I mean, can you talk to the aspect of the audio design and helping to piece this together?
Where to start, really? I think in terms of like the music was a very big, long-running conversation that Luke and I had. We wanted to, some kind of ethereal, something that kind of felt, we did the Ride of the Valkyries electronically. And we wanted to, originally I think that the conversation was, there was obviously the connection to Apocalypse Now with that piece being used in that way. But we wanted to kind of like make it a little bit more alien, and give it a kind of more of a Clockwork Orange type vibe, which is where the synth idea came in, with the kind of like the Wendy Carlos kind of weird, I don't want to say degradation of the classical pieces, but it was just a weird way to get a little more distance. So when we had our composer doing that, he really knocked that out of the park. Also, to his credit, managed to make a lot of it really, really beautiful as well. I had, Luke had given me a lot of temp pieces to work with. Were they from? Mostly from
Robin Guthrie, and Wiper and the
And a lot of that had kind of gave it a really interesting ethereal vibe, which we maintained, but also I think enhanced. The other big thing that we ended up using, that we ended up temping in, was the piece from Body Double, Telescope. And that one, I think we went to see a screening of Body Double at the Arrow one night, and as we're watching it, I just leaned over to Luke. I said, "This is their theme. This is Steve and Tom in a nutshell." And he's like, "Oh my God!" So we really leaned on that, and Luke found a really interesting cover of that we ended up putting in the movie, and it just worked really, really, really well. But just in terms of what the sound design, like everything else, a lot of that was built in the cut, and we brought it to our sound designer to really enhance what was there and put it into a 5.1 environment. But a lot of those decisions were made in the edit, to enhance the characters, what was happening to the character's his inner monologue. Basically, it was the more it progressed, the darker it became, the more detached from reality it became, the more droning sounds became, until the shocking ending.
It's interesting, Kern, that you bring that up about the adjustments with it, because a lot has to do with porn is the audio aspect of it. And to build in that audio landscape of it, and even in the opening Bukkake scene, where, Tom, whispers to Steve, and even that, just that change in volume makes all the difference in how that scene rides.
Totally.
It's so impactful with the sound design with it.
Yeah, I think what's really funny is that there's a case to be made that moment kind of feels almost like you could look at Tom. I'm not saying this is the way to interpret the movie or not, but at one point we were like, it's almost like Tom is like inside Steve's head.
Right,
like it's
right.
almost like a Fight Club type
He's a
thing.
Jiminy Cricket right there.
Yeah, right. And that's, so that moment was really like that. That's where the dreaminess kind of came, and it really kind of like, because that whole opening sequence is before you get into the buddy comedy stuff, and then in the whole opening sequence was really meant to sort of prepare the audience for what was coming.
Yeah.
And without giving them a sense of what was going to happen, but giving them like the general vibe and saying like, look, this is a bit of extreme filmmaking up front, so that you're not totally miffed by the ending, because it does. A lot of the conversation we had was the balance between the comedy and the drama and the tragedy, and I felt like obviously I had dealt with, I call it a wide emotional bandwidth.
Yeah, very much.
And I had dealt with that in Sushi Girl.
Yeah.
And so I kind of knew how to maneuver between those two aspects at any given moment, and it was also really helpful to have me there, from an editing perspective on set, being like, do we have this yet? Because I knew there were key points in the movie that we really needed to stick that landing there and make sure that we had those moments, because those were the emotional core of the movie. And if we didn't have those, it wouldn't work. So that was a lot of what went into it.
One thing before, Lucas, I want to hear your perspective on sound as we wrap this up. But that scene where Steve is focused on the TV and you see his gaze, and that for me right there is the horror of the film. To see his psychosis crack after all this pressure, and to see that he's looking at a screen and what his perception is versus the other, it's just so terrifying. It gives me chills right now talking about it, because that's how quickly someone can snap out of it. Finish up, Lucas. Talk about the sound design score and what it meant to the film.
So the score, I really wanted it to be inside Steve's head. So thematically, like the reason why a lot of the score is beautiful is because that's how he feels the stuff is. I remember when I saw Nightcrawler a few years ago, I thought it was a very interesting choice to have this like triumphant music, which a lot of people criticize. But then I realized that it was Gyllenhaal's character, like it was basically inside his head,
right? And
so then I thought, I think it helps you connect with Steve, and it's also interesting that even though there's a lot of funny stuff, and music is not comedic. Like I just don't really like comedic style music in general. I like scores that are very emotive, and we worked with Jonathan Snipes, who did Starry Eyes, which I love that score.
Yeah.
Room 37. Yeah, and so he brought a lot, We knew we wanted synth. I wanted synth, and I wanted it to be just a very emotive score. Like even though there's a lot of things that some people might think are gross, I wanted it to have a beauty to it. And then with the sound design, I wanted at a lot of times to be realistic, but then at times dip into the surreal, like in the opening sequence, at various other parts. Like it gets, because of the way that the camera work is, it kind of starts to feel more surreal as the movie goes on, like more like a fever dream.
Right.
And films that I watched like leading up to this would be like Mysterious Skin, Krisha, The Swimmer, Waking Fright, like films that have that like existential dread, and so like when you watch like a lot of those films, they'll have these moments where it's like there's just something off, like the overall feel of it. And I think a lot of it's because the sound design, the camera work, and the music are presenting like very surreal and crazy stuff, and sometimes in a very normal, realistic way. And so that informed a lot of it.
Kelly, anything to throw in there before we wrap this up, my friend?
For the sound, I think you get there's a little bit of less is more. And and I think that was some of the direction given to the sound designer. Like, in a traditional way, you would fill out the movie with all this Foley and everything. And we had a lot of Foley, and there were a lot of things that are necessary, but there's also kind of a lot that you can get out of it, where there's an eerie quietness around a porn set sometimes. All of a sudden it's just full bore, and then there's just something very unsettling about how quiet it can be too. And I think that that the way that they did that with the sound worked really well, in a sort of less is more way.
Yeah, we've all watched porn in certain aspects of our life, and it's always over the top with the sound, with the emotion, with the action, with the the framing, the positioning. It's always over the top and always more and more louder when it comes to what you see with porn. So to have that less is more, I think really does give a reality to it. It is Mope. We are here. We are talking the film here and scratching the surface. Let's go across the board there. Lucas, I'll throw it over to you first. What else do the fans need to know as we wrap this up?
To reiterate, this is a true story that I think will take you to very dark places. And if you're interested in movies that are more of an experience than just a casual viewing, then you'll like this. It's not for somebody who just wants to watch a movie and have it wash over them. It will challenge you, and it will show you some stuff in life, man's inhumanity towards other man. It's going to show you some dark stuff, but I think you'll be rewarded if you have the strength to carry on to the end.
Kern?
I call it a litmus test to see how dark your sense of humor is.
Wow. All right.
It really does. It because it has that wide emotional bandwidth, and because it goes to those dark places, and because it starts out so kind of fun and almost carefree, it really is a kind of a it's whatever the different gradations of your sense of humor are until you get to that breaking point where it becomes a total nightmare. So I think it is an indictment of toxic masculinity. It is a study of a man with a mental illness, and it is a study of America's obsession with celebrity. But at the same time, it's it really is a test to the audience.
You know what? Real quick, Kelly, before I bring you up, and I think, Kern, you touched on something that I wasn't really sure how much I wanted to go into, but I'll throw it to whoever wants to answer this as we wrap it up. The level of mental illness and how it's portrayed, was that a real touchy subject in writing the script and what the performance that Nathan brought forward with it? Whoever would like to address that.
Oh, it definitely was. Because it's a huge part of the story, but at the same time we weren't. It's about a lot of things, but Nathan met Dave Hill, Steve Driver's father,
right,
and had a long conversation to inform everything we could know about his son and how to best portray him. And so it was integral to his performance. The performance would not be what it is unless they had met. Like that, Nathan cites that as a big influence. And at the Sundance premiere, when he saw Dave there, he didn't necessarily know he was going to be there. He almost had a very strong emotional reaction to seeing him, because it really, I think, made him realize that he had a responsibility in his performance, that this mattered to real people. And it also matters to me. That's part of the reason why I wanted to do the story. Was I think that as I keep saying, there are people. There's a lot of problems in our society because of people who have issues, and there's nothing to help them.
Right.
There's no system to help them. Nobody cares. Like in LA, we have a huge problem with this, and nobody cares.
It's
nowhere to send them.
everywhere.
There's no help.
It's everywhere's, and from someone who's involved in it, it gets worse and worse all the time because there's so many that fall through the cracks, and we see, unfortunately, things like Steve Driver in More Than You Know. Kelly, finish us off, my friend. What do the fans need to know?
Well, at the end of the day, I'm really proud of the way that the movie turned out and how it turned out, and I'm really grateful that I got to work on it with these guys, and through this process, we've built like we're a filmmaking team, but now I consider these guys pretty close friends, and I'm happy for that, and I think we just want the movie to get out there and as many people to see it as would dare want to watch it, and check out all the social media feeds and everything. Just come on out and see it. We'd love to talk to you about it, and just want to say thanks for having us on, Jay.
The pleasure is mine. Number 2 for me in the first half of 2019. Everywhere as I go, I gush about Mope, and it really is the most balanced film of the year. With comedy, you have that drama, you have that tragedy and horror in the final act. And Lucas, I want you to ask me, well, what's the final thing I want to say to the audience out there? Go ahead, you can say that.
Really, well, what is the one specific thing that you liked, but that really made the film work for you?
The aspect that they'll never eat a tuna fish sandwich out of the vending machine. That's what really got to me.
You know what? Those vending machines are real.
I know they're real. God. I won't go into any further about what's in the vending machine besides the tuna fish. Yeah. But the way that Max Adler, who plays Chris, just takes it and eats it and walks, it's hysterically funny. And that's one of the great charms about Mope. It's got so much. Guys, congratulations on the film. I look forward to the next festival screening, hopefully very soon. And is there any festivals you can announce while you're on here where it's going to be playing?
The big ones coming up are we're going to be at Sitges, which is in Spain. So that's a huge one.
See you there.
Be there. We are going to play in Sydney at their film festival in Australia, and then on the States side, we have one coming up in New York City.
What?
Fear NYC, baby.
Yes,
come on.
Yes.
Let's pack that theater as many times as we can.
Folks, I was trying not to say that directly because I didn't know if I was allowed to say that directly. I guess we are allowed to say it. But yes, I am very happy to see that you guys are coming to Fear NYC, and I will see you out there. It was my recommendation that it played there at Fear NYC because of how much I loved it. So I'm so happy you guys are joining us for this year.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
That's awesome, Jay.
You're most welcome, and I can't tell you how happy I am. Guys, congratulations. Kelly, what's the websites before we jump off?
We are at Instagram and Twitter at Mope Movie, mopemovie.com, and Facebook at Mope Movie as well. So MOPEMOVIE is how you get there.
Fantastic. Kelly, Kern, Lucas, gentlemen, thank you so much and congratulations on Mope.